This is your flipped lesson for the moon. We are going to start with some moon basic facts. First of all, the moon for us is called a natural satellite, and a satellite is just something that orbits something else, and it's called natural because it was not made by man or launched by NASA. A couple of facts about the moon: it's about 247,000 miles away from planet Earth. If we were to fly there on a spaceship, it would take us about 3 days to get there. The moon does rotate and revolve, and it rotates and revolves at the same speed. So if we were to think about that, a year on the moon would be the same as a day on the moon because its orbit and its rotation are the same speed. We can only see one side of the moon. It's called the near side. The far side of the moon is only visible if you fly past it on a spacecraft. And it's important to note, I guess, that the moon does rotate counterclockwise. All right, the structure of the moon, how is it composed and what is it composed of? There are dark parts. So if you think about any time you've seen the moon out at night, there are parts that look a little darker than others. Those dark parts are called mare. The plural of those are called maria. Then you see light parts on the moon, those are highlands. So those would be elevated sections of the moon, almost like a little mountain range. The moon does not have any water on it. It does not have air. There's no atmosphere around the moon. There are no clouds, and nothing lives on the moon. The interior, inside of the moon, it does have a core, very similar to ours, a mantle, and a crust. So if you think about any time you have gone outside and looked at the moon, it appears to change shape. And those are called moon phases. How the moon gets lit up is it is actually reflecting light coming from the sun. So the sun will shine on the near side of the moon and reflect off, and that's how we see the different parts of the moon. Okay? It takes about 1 month to go through all 8 of the phases. All right, and so for those phases, the moon could wax, which means to grow, or it can wane, which means to shrink. All right, the moon does not change size, so it's not like the moon is getting bigger and smaller, but what we see, or how much of the moon we can see, does change. So if we were to take a look at the moon as it goes through its different phases, you can see we have the sun over here shining. Here is planet Earth, so pretend you are standing on planet Earth and you are facing this moon right here. So at one point in the month, we actually wouldn't see any of the moon because the half that's getting lit up is facing away from us. This is called a new moon. And then the moon is going to orbit to this location. We can start to see just one small sliver of the moon here. That is called a waxing crescent. Up here we can see the first quarter moon, and the reason it is called a first quarter moon is because we can see 1/4 of the half of the moon we can see. All right, so we only see half of the moon, and we can then see half of a half, which is a quarter. Over here, this is going to be a new vocabulary word, and I apologize that my board erased it. I will spell it for you, but this would be called a waxing gibbous. So over here are the waxing phases. What we can see of the moon is growing. The word gibbous is spelled Gibbous, and the word gibbous means more than half, but less than all. So we can see more than half of our side of the moon, but we can't quite see all of it. Okay? Down here is where we would get a full moon. All right, so all of the sun's rays are reflecting off the half of the moon that we can see, and so this would be a full moon. Down here is where the moon starts to shrink. So this is called a waning gibbous. All right, so we can see more than half of it, but not quite all of it. Here is the last quarter moon, so we can see the last quarter of the half that we can see. And then finally, you have a waning crescent. And to go through all 8 of these phases takes about 1 month. Now on this picture, it looks like everything is flat and in a straight line, and that's not really the case. When the moon does orbit us, it is not a flat circle, it is more on an angle, and so that's why we can get a full moon, because the Earth is not blocking anything. Now one thing that the moon does do for us is it does provide us with eclipses, and they aren't every time that there's the moon is out, but these are very rare when things line up just perfectly. All right, so we could have a solar or a lunar eclipse, and with each of these, it could be a partial, so it's not a full eclipse, or we could have a total. So down here I have two pictures of the difference between the two eclipses. So in a solar eclipse, if this is the sun, the moon is in between the sun and the earth. And the moon blocks or casts the shadow on the sun, so we would be eclipsing the sun. This would be a solar eclipse. This happens when we are in the new moon phase. A lunar eclipse, you can see the only difference here is the earth and the moon are flip-flop from where they are in a solar eclipse. In this case, the earth blocks or casts a shadow on the moon, all right, instead of, in this case, on the sun, and this would occur during a full moon stage.